In the gilded halls of Blackwood Manor, where billionaires and crime bosses disguised as aristocrats sit together at the same table, a maid in a ball gown sits down in a chair no one has dared touch. And the most powerful man in the room rises for her. No one understands why, not even she. But tonight will reveal a secret buried 15 years in blood, in fire, and in the memory of a child no one remembers. If you are watching this story, please like and comment the city you are watching in so I know how far my story has progressed. Don't leave, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew. The uniform smelled like bleach and somebody else's sweat. Elena Ashcroft had worn it for 4 years, and she still hadn't gotten used to the smell. White blouse, black skirt, hair pulled back so tight it gave her a low-grade headache every shift. She told herself the headache was fine. The headache meant she was working. Working meant rent paid, meant the small apartment on Caldwell Street stayed hers for another month, meant the stack of overdue bills on her kitchen table stayed manageable instead of catastrophic. She moved through the service corridor of Blackwood Manor the way she always moved, fast, invisible, eyes down. The gala had started 40 minutes ago. Out in the grand ballroom, 300 people in evening wear were drinking wine that cost more per bottle than Elena made in a week. She knew because she'd carried 12 of those bottles from the cellar herself that afternoon. Her arms aching, her back complaining in the low, persistent way it had complained since the loading dock accident 2 winters ago. She didn't think about the guests. That was the rule she'd taught herself. Don't think about them. Don't look at their jewelry. Don't listen to their conversations. Move, pour, clear, vanish. Exist only in the margins of their world. It had worked, mostly. For 4 years, it had worked just fine. Elena, Marcus, the senior event coordinator, appeared at the end of the corridor. He was a compact, nervous man who wore his anxiety the way other people wore cologne. Too much of it, impossible to ignore. Right now his face was the particular shade of pale that meant something had gone wrong. "I need you." She stopped. "What happened?" "Countess Harrington. Her flight got diverted. She's not coming." He said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. "She was supposed to sit at table 1, seat 7. Okay, pull the setting, adjust the arrangement." "You don't understand." Marcus grabbed her elbow, steering her sideways toward a rack of hanging garments. "Table 1 isn't just a table. Every seat has been pre-assigned based on 6 weeks of political negotiation between people who will notice if the balance is wrong. If there's an empty chair at table 1 tonight, certain guests will read it as an insult. Deliberate, targeted." He was already pulling a garment bag from the rack. "There needs to be a body in that seat." Elena looked at the garment bag, then at Marcus. "No. It's 1 dinner, 2 hours. I'm staff, Marcus. I clear dishes." "You're the right height." He unzipped the bag. Inside was an emerald evening gown, floor length, structured at the shoulders, the kind of dress that cost more than Elena's car. "Harrington and you are almost identical in build. I measured. I had our tailor check." "You measured me." "Last month, when we did the uniform updates." "Elena, I'm asking you." "You're telling me." He had the decency to flinch. "I'm asking, please. This event is worth $2.4 million in contracts. If it goes sideways because of an empty chair, I lose everything I've spent 8 years building. I lose the manor account. I lose my business." He shoved the dress into her hands. The fabric was cold and heavy and real. "1 dinner. You sit, you smile, you don't talk unless spoken to. You know how to do that better than anyone." The last part landed somewhere it wasn't meant to. She looked at the dress for a long moment. Then she said, "If anyone asks who I am, you're a private guest of Harrington's, a friend, representing her interests. And if they figure out I'm staff..." Marcus didn't answer fast enough. "Marcus." "Then we handle it," he said. "But they won't. The lighting in there is low. Your hair's already done. You know how to carry yourself." She didn't know if that was true. She'd spent 4 years learning to disappear. She wasn't sure she remembered how to do the opposite. She took the dress. The gown fit. That was the worst part. It fit perfectly. And when Elena stood in front of the small mirror in the staff changing room, Something shifted in her chest that she didn't have a name for. The woman in the mirror didn't look like a housekeeper. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere. Someone who'd never had to count her change at a grocery store or choose between a new coat and a dentist appointment. She looked like a lie. Good, she thought. That's exactly what this is. She pinned her hair differently, borrowed a pair of heels from the spare wardrobe closet, and spent 3 minutes in the bathroom breathing through the thing tightening in her sternum. Anxiety, probably. Or dignity trying to escape before she sold it. Then she walked out and became someone else. Table 1 was in the center of the ballroom, not near the center. The center, elevated slightly on a marble platform that seemed to exist solely to remind everyone seated there that they were above everything else in the room. 7 place settings of bone china, 7 crystal wine glasses that caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the tablecloth like broken stars. 6 guests already seated when Elena arrived, guided by a white-gloved attendant who hadn't been told she was staff, or had been told and didn't care. She sat in seat 7. She picked up her water glass. She did not look around, but she felt it, the moment people noticed. It moved through the room like a current, table to table, that particular social static that meant someone had done something wrong without fully understanding the rules they'd broken. A woman to her left, silver-haired and sharp-jawed, turned to look at her with the kind of slow, deliberate scrutiny that didn't bother to pretend it was anything else. "I don't believe we've met," she said. Her accent was mid-Atlantic old money, vowels clipped and precise. "I'm representing Countess Harrington's interests this evening," Elena said. Her voice came out steady. She was surprised. The woman's eyes moved down and up, cataloging. "Are you?" "She sends her regrets, unavoidable circumstances." The man across from her, wide-shouldered, 70s, with the kind of tan that came from a yacht rather than a garden, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Harrington's sending her people now instead of coming herself. That's new." "That's rude," the silver-haired woman said, but she wasn't talking about Harrington anymore. Elena kept her hands in her lap, where no one could see them tighten. The dinner service began. Soup first, something pale and cream-colored that Elena didn't taste because she was too busy watching the room, tracking exits the way she always tracked exits in unfamiliar spaces. It was a habit she'd never been able to explain. She just did it. She always counted the doors. The laughter started at the 3rd course. She wasn't sure who began it. A comment from the man across the table, something murmured to his companion, then a ripple of sound moving outward. Not loud, not theatrical, but pointed. The kind of laughter that was meant to be overheard. She caught fragments. "Harrington's housekeeper, I think." And then, "No, look at her hands. That's a working woman's hands." And then something worse that she didn't quite catch but understood anyway. Her hands. She looked at them once, quickly, involuntarily. The knuckles slightly roughened. The right index finger with its old chemical burn from the cleaning supplies incident 2 years ago. She'd thought the low light would hide it. It hadn't. She set her fork down, picked up her wine glass, took a sip she didn't taste. Around her, table 1 had shifted from ignoring her to performing her presence for the benefit of the surrounding tables. The silver-haired woman had turned her chair a precise 20 degrees away. The man with the yacht tan was telling a story now, his voice carrying, and people at nearby tables were listening and smiling, and Elena knew without hearing all of it that she was the story. She thought, "I can stand up. I can walk to the kitchen, tell Marcus this was a mistake, put on the uniform, and finish the shift. It would cost him nothing except a moment of social awkwardness. The empty chair wouldn't even matter anymore because the worst social damage had already been done. She was 3 seconds from doing exactly that when the room went quiet. Not gradually. Suddenly, like a switch thrown. Elena looked up. At the far end of table 1, at the seat she'd been too careful to look at directly since sitting down, the man in seat 1 was standing. She'd noticed him peripherally, the way you notice something large and potentially dangerous, catalogued without staring, filed for reference. Late 40s, black hair going silver at the temples. A face that didn't have a neutral expression so much as a carefully maintained stillness, the kind of stillness that took years to learn and meant something had to be pressed down to maintain it. A dark suit that cost money without advertising it. No jewelry except a plain watch. The kind of man who didn't need decoration to occupy space. He was standing and he was looking at her, and 300 people in the room had stopped talking because when this man did something unexpected, the room responded to it the way a body responds to sudden pain, total and immediate. He picked up his own wine glass, crossed the few feet of platform between seat 1 and seat 7 in 5 measured steps, set the glass down in front of her, in the exact space her glass had occupied. Then he pulled the chair from his own position, the chair at the literal center of the table, the one she'd registered as subtly more prominent than the others without understanding why, and moved it to the space beside her. He sat down. The silence held. Elena became aware that her breathing had become very deliberate and controlled, which meant some part of her had understood before the rest of her caught up that she was in territory that required it. She made herself look at him. He was already looking at her. His eyes were gray, she noticed. Not the romantic gray that belonged in descriptions, but the specific gray of old concrete, of overcast sky before rain. Functional, flat, reading her with an attention that made the silver-haired woman's earlier scrutiny feel like a casual glance. "Damien Volkov," he said. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it clearly, which somehow made it carry more weight than the yacht tan man's performance had. She knew the name. Everyone in the room knew the name. The name was the reason 300 people were holding their breath. "Elena Ashcroft," she said, because lying about her name seemed suddenly worse than whatever truth she was standing at the edge of. Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, but she caught it. A flash of something that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite surprise. Something older than both. "I know," he said. The silence broke around them as the room erupted. She didn't understand what had happened. That was the honest truth of it, and Elena clung to it the way she'd learned to cling to honesty when everything else felt like ground giving way. Around her, table 1 had fractured into urgent, murmured conversations. Guests at other tables were leaning toward each other, hands cupped to mouths, eyes moving between her and the man now sitting a foot away from her. From the edges of the room, she could see security shifting their positions. Not Blackwood Manor's staff security, but the other kind. The men in better suits with the particular stillness around their eyes that came from being paid to watch for threats. They were watching her. "I should tell you," Elena said quietly, looking at the tablecloth instead of at him, "that I'm actually a housekeeper here. My name is real, but everything else tonight is—" She stopped, found a word. "Circumstantial." "I know that too," Damien Volkov said. She looked at him. "I know who works in this building," he said. "I know staff from guests. I've known for 8 minutes that you were placed at this table as a substitute." He picked up the wine glass he'd moved, her wine glass, which had now become his by the logic of whatever had just happened, and held it without drinking. "I chose to sit here anyway." "Why?" He studied her face with that concrete gray attention. "Because I've spent 15 years looking for you," he said, "and I wasn't going to let a room full of people who don't matter to either of us make me wait any longer." The clatter of silverware from the surrounding tables was the only sound for a moment. Someone laughed nervously 3 tables away, and the sound died fast. Elena felt something move through her that wasn't fear exactly, but was adjacent to it, a wrongness she couldn't locate, like reaching for a step in the dark and finding the ground a half-inch lower than expected. "You have the wrong person," she said. "No," he said simply. "I don't. I've worked in this building for 4 years. Before that, I was a cleaner at the Meridian Hotel. Before that, I worked a diner on Route 9. I'm not—" She stopped herself. "Whatever you think I am, I'm not it." "What's the first thing you remember?" he asked. She stared at him. "What?" "Your earliest memory, not stories someone told you about your childhood. Your own. The first image." Her mouth opened to answer automatically, the way you answer questions that don't feel like traps until after you've already started, and then stopped, because the first image that surfaced wasn't the small bedroom in the Caldwell Foster house, wasn't the school cafeteria, wasn't anything she could place in a sequence she recognized. It was heat, orange light, the smell of burning rubber and something else beneath it, something copper sharp, and the underside of metal, very close to her face, and the specific cold of wet ground against her palms. She'd had the image before, assumed it was a dream. She had it sometimes when she was very tired, just that fragment, those sensory pieces without context or narrative, gone by morning. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. Her voice came out more controlled than she felt. Damien Volkov set down the wine glass. Across the room, she could see Marcus hovering at the edge of the service entrance, his face a careful blank that she recognized as barely contained panic. "I want to find out if I'm right," Volkov said. "I want to run a proper investigation, with your cooperation, into who you are before the age of 9, into what happened to the records, into why someone worked very hard to ensure you had no past." He paused. "And I want to know, before anything else, if you're in danger." "In danger from what?" He looked at her steadily. "From the same people who tried to kill us both 15 years ago," he said, "and believe they succeeded." The chandelier light moved above them as a door opened somewhere in the building, sending a ripple of reflected light across the ceiling like washu. Elena watched it. Her hands were very still in her lap. The copper smell from the memory fragment was still at the back of her throat, phantom and faint and impossible. "I was a child 15 years ago," she said. "Yes," Damien Volkov said. "You were." The way he said it, past tense, certain, carrying weight she didn't yet understand, made the fine hairs on the back of her neck rise. She picked up her water glass and drank and said nothing and waited, because she didn't know what question came next. And because some part of her, the part that counted exits and tracked doors, and had always known without knowing why, understood that the question wasn't whether her life was about to change. It was whether it had already changed 15 years ago, on a night she couldn't remember. At the edge of the room, one of the men in the good suits had stopped watching her and started watching the main entrance instead. His hand had moved to his jacket, not quickly, quietly. The way a man moves his hand when something he was expecting has just become something he is preparing for. Elena saw it. She saw it, and she noticed that she understood what it meant, and she noticed that she understood it in a way that didn't require explanation. That understanding frightened her more than anything else that had happened tonight. "Mr. Volkov," she said quietly. "Yes." "Something's wrong." He didn't turn his head, but his hand moved just slightly, and suddenly she understood that he had already known and had been waiting to see if she would see it too. "How many exits have you counted since you sat down?" he asked. The chandelier above them shuddered almost imperceptibly as something, footsteps or vibration or something heavier, moved through the floor above. "6, she said, and the lights went out. The darkness lasted 4 seconds. Elena counted them the way she counted exits, automatically, without deciding to. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the emergency lighting kicked in along the baseboards, red-tinted and low, turning the ballroom into something that looked less like a gala and more like the inside of a wound. 300 people inhaled at the same time. Then someone screamed, and that broke it open. Damien was already moving, not toward the exits, not away from the table, sideways, putting himself between Elena and the center of the room in a motion so practiced it didn't look like a decision. His hand closed around her wrist. Not rough, firm. The grip of someone who'd learned the difference between holding someone back and holding someone down. "Stay low," he said. "Don't go toward the main doors." "Why not?" "Because whoever cut the power is waiting there." She didn't ask how he knew. She crouched with him behind the overturned edge of table 1. Not overturned by them, she realized, but by the crush of people already surging toward the exits, 300 bodies reacting to darkness, and one scream with the collective intelligence of pure panic. Crystal and china hit the marble floor. Someone went down in the surge and cried out. The sound of breaking glass was almost musical in the low red light. Elena's heels were wrong for this. She reached down, pulled them off one-handed, dropped them. Damien noticed, said nothing. A man in a dark jacket pushed past them at the edge of the platform, moving against the flow of the crowd, toward the service corridor rather than the main exit. Something about his posture was wrong. Not panic. Controlled purpose wearing panic as a costume. "That one," Elena said. Damien followed her sightline. His jaw tightened. You saw that? Something about the way he's moving, she said. She couldn't explain it better than that. The man's shoulders were set, his chin down, his trajectory deliberate beneath the shuffling. He wasn't fleeing, he was positioning. Damien straightened slightly. Over the heads of the crowd, she could see his men. 3 of them she'd identified earlier by their stillness, already cutting across the room in separate vectors, converging on the service corridor entrance without looking like they were converging. Coordinated, wordless, precise. Whatever communication system they used, it wasn't visible. She should have been more frightened of that than she was. The man in the dark jacket pushed through the service corridor door and disappeared. Stay here, Damien said, alone in a dark room where something is wrong. Your people are following the man in the jacket. She looked at him. In the red emergency light, his face was all shadow and structure, the gray eyes almost black. I counted 6 exits. The one at the northeast corner of the ballroom behind the string section. No one's covered it. He looked at her for a moment. 2 seconds? Maybe 3. Something calculating happening behind his face. Come then, he said, but stay behind me. She followed him and did not stay behind him. The northeast exit opened into a narrow corridor that ran along the building's original stone foundation, pre-renovation, cold in a way the ballroom's climate control never reached. Elena's bare feet hit the stone floor, and the cold shot straight up through her shins. She kept moving. Behind them, the ballroom noise was already changing, the chaos organizing itself into something more directed as Blackwood Manor's own security found their footing. Someone was shouting instructions. Flashlight beams crossed the high windows. The corridor was empty. Damien stopped, turned once, checking behind them. His hand moved to his jacket and she thought he would produce a weapon, but instead he produced a phone, thumbed a quick message, put it away. Power cut was deliberate, he said. Not to her exactly. Processing aloud. Not a circuit failure. The building's backup should have activated in under 2 seconds. 4 means someone interfered with the secondary panel. That requires access and knowledge. Inside job, Elena said. Or someone paid for inside information. He looked at the corridor's far end where it branched into a T. The question is whether the power was the objective or the setup. Setup for what? Before he could answer, they both heard it. Footsteps from the left branch of the T. Not running. Walking, measured, the deliberate pace of someone who'd already reached where they needed to be and was waiting for something to come to them. Damien's hand went to his jacket again, and this time came back with a weapon, compact and black, held with the casual authority of long familiarity. He didn't point it, just held it down at his side, one finger straight alongside the trigger guard. Elena's throat tightened, not at the gun, at the fact that she registered his trigger discipline before she registered the gun itself. She didn't know why she knew what trigger discipline looked like. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice came from the left branch, speaking in even, unhurried tones. Volkov, tell your men to stand down in the service corridor. The man you're chasing works for me. I'd hate for them to misunderstand. Damien's stillness changed quality. It went from controlled to something beneath controlled, something older, colder, a bedrock reaction that showed only in the slight shift of his weight onto his back foot. Rourke, he said. A man stepped around the corner of the T-mid-50s, well-built, running to wait. The kind of face that had been handsome 20 years ago and now wore its age like a debt it resented. He was dressed for the gala, black tie, well-fitted, but his collar was open and his tie was loose in the way of a man who'd already stopped performing for the evening. Connor Rourke. Elena didn't know how she knew the name to attach to the face. She just did. Like the exit counting, like the grip assessment, like the trigger discipline. It arrived without an explanation, and she noted it and filed it and kept breathing. Who's the woman? Rourke said, looking at her. None of your concern, Damien said. She's sitting at table 1 in Harrington's seat. That makes her everyone's concern. Rourke's eyes moved over Elena with the assessing quality of a man used to determining people's value and use before their names. What is she? An asset? A message? A guest, Damien said. Rourke made a sound that wasn't a laugh but used the same muscles. You don't bring guests to table 1. Nobody does. That's not what that seat is. He took 2 steps closer, hands open, visible. The body language of a man who wanted to appear unarmed and didn't expect anyone to fully believe it. You want to tell me what's actually happening tonight, or do we keep performing? You cut the power, Damien said. I didn't cut anything. Your man was in the secondary panel room. 2 of my people saw him. My man was conducting a security walk of this building on my request, because I received information this morning suggesting tonight's event was a potential target. Rourke stopped walking. He was 6 feet away now, close enough that Elena could see the tension in his jaw working beneath the skin. Which, look around, appears to have been accurate. So before you point whatever you have in your jacket at me, consider that I may have come tonight to help. Consider, Damien said, that I've heard that exact framing from you before, and what followed it cost me 11 men. The corridor went very quiet. Rourke's face did something complicated. Not guilt. Not quite. The expression of a man who'd made a decision a long time ago and had been justifying it ever since and was tired of the justification but couldn't stop. That was a different situation. My men are still dead, and I'm still standing here talking to you instead of having this conversation with 6 inches of marble between us, so maybe account for what that means. Elena was watching them both. The conversation had the texture of something old. Not this argument specifically, but the one underneath it, the one that had been running for years and only surfaced in corridors like this one. She had the distinct sense that she was seeing less than half of what was actually being said. Someone cut that power, she said. Both men looked at her. She held the look. If it wasn't you, she said to Rourke, and it wasn't your man, someone else was in the secondary panel room, someone who knew the building, knew the timing, and knew which event they were targeting. And they did it tonight, which means tonight was specific, not opportunistic. Rourke studied her. Who are you? She's... Damien started. I asked her. Elena Ashcroft, she said. I work here. I know this building. Housekeeping, Rourke said slowly. Yes. And you're telling me your assessment of a coordinated power disruption at a gala attended by... He counted on his fingers. 6 crime syndicate heads, 3 sitting government officials, and 2 foreign intelligence personnel. I'm telling you what I observed. He looked at Damien. Where did you find her? I didn't find her, Damien said. She was already here. Something shifted in Rourke's expression. Fast, almost imperceptible. He looked at Elena again, and this time the assessment was different. More careful, more layered. Like a man who'd just been handed a piece of information he'd thought was lost. Ashcroft, he said quietly, like the word tasted like something. You know that name, Elena said. I know a lot of names. You knew that one specifically, just now when I said it. Rourke's jaw worked once. He looked past her, toward the direction of the ballroom, then back. The panel room situation is being handled by my people. You can verify that. He said it to Damien. What I need from you is 20 minutes of your time, tonight, before you leave this building. There's something you need to be made aware of. His eyes moved to Elena one more time. Something that may involve your guest more directly than either of you realizes. Damien's voice was careful and flat. If this is another arrangement, it's a warning, Rourke said. That's all. Call it what you want, but hear it. He straightened his collar without looking down at it. 20 minutes. The East Library. 30 minutes from now. He turned to leave, then paused. Bring the woman. She'll want to hear this. He walked back around the corner of the T and was gone. The corridor held his absence like a held breath. Bond. The East Library smelled like old paper and money, which in Elena's experience were often the same smell. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a fireplace that was burning despite the season, leather chairs arranged in a loose circle that suggested conversation without committing to it. 3 of Damien's men stood at various walls, not hiding, being seen. A 4th stood outside the door. Rourke was already there when they arrived. He had a glass of something amber in one hand that he wasn't drinking. His jacket was back on and buttoned, the performance of the evening reconstructed. Seated in one of the leather chairs was a woman Elena hadn't seen before. Small, precise, late 60s, with the bone structure of someone who had once been striking and now was simply formidable. She wore no jewelry. Her hands were folded in her lap with the deliberate stillness of someone managing pain. She looked at Elena the moment Elena entered the room. Not at Damien, at Elena. "Sit down, please," the woman said. Her voice carried the faint architectural remnant of an Eastern European accent, old enough and controlled enough that it only showed in certain vowels. Elena stayed standing. "This is Dr. Vera Ansel," Rourke said. "She was the attending physician at Hargrove County Medical in the spring, 15 years ago, specifically in the 48-hour window following the Meridian Road incident." "What's the Meridian Road incident?" Elena said. Rourke and Ansel exchanged a look. "Brief. Enough." "An ambush," Damien said. He was standing slightly to Elena's left, and his voice had gone to that controlled flatness she was starting to recognize as the sound of something being held under pressure. 8 vehicles. A coordinated attack on a convoy moving through Meridian County. 11 of my people died. I survived." He paused. "I survived because of outside intervention." "A child," Dr. Ansel said. Her eyes were still on Elena. "A girl. Approximately 8 years old, she was found sheltering beneath one of the overturned vehicles after the attackers withdrew. She had pulled a wounded man, Mr. Volkov, partially clear of a burning wreck, far enough that he could breathe, far enough that when medical services arrived, he was recoverable." The library was very still. Elena's ears were ringing, low, constant, a frequency just below sound. The cold from the corridor had followed her in and was sitting in her chest. "The child was unidentified," Ansel continued. "She had a head injury, significant memory disruption, not uncommon in severe trauma cases, especially in younger patients. By the time she was stable enough to be interviewed, the family who collected her had already filed paperwork, a foster arrangement moving her out of county." Ansel's hands unfolded and refolded. "I tried to follow up. The case was closed. The records had been—" She searched for the word. "Reorganized." "By who?" Elena said. Her voice came out flat and strange to her own ears. "That," Rourke said, "is the question that has become suddenly and urgently relevant again." Elena looked at Damien. His face was giving her nothing except that weight, that specific weight she'd felt since he'd sat down beside her in the ballroom, the thing that felt like certainty pointed at her from outside. "You think I'm that child," she said. "I know you're that child," he said. "You can't know. Your hands." He said it quietly. "The scarring pattern on your right palm. I didn't see it clearly until the corridor, the emergency lighting." He stopped. "The wreckage had a specific edge, structural failure in a particular way. The child who freed me caught that edge pulling me through." He looked at her hand. "I've spent 15 years looking at photographs of that injury pattern." Elena looked at her right palm. She'd had the scar so long she'd stopped noticing it. A contractor told her once it looked like a gripping injury. She'd believed him because it was a story that fit. "Even if that's true," she said, and hated how unsteady the words were becoming, "that doesn't tell us who killed the power tonight." "No," Rourke said. "It doesn't." He set down the untouched amber glass. "What it tells us is that someone at this event recognized you, someone who attended this evening with a reason to want both of you in the same room at the same moment." He looked at Damien. "The power cut wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation. Someone needed to see how Volkov responded to you, whether what he suspects is true." He paused. "And now they know." The fire shifted in the grate. A log collapsed inward, sending a brief shower of sparks. "Who?" Damien said. One word, quiet as a breath. But the room changed around it. Rourke's face did something she hadn't seen it do before. It went uncertain. A man who dealt in information looking at a gap in what he knew. "That's what I don't have yet. But whoever it is, they've been watching you for longer than tonight. And now that they've confirmed she's real and she's with you." Elena said, "They'll come for me." Rourke looked at her. "They'll come for both of you, but her specifically, yes. You're the only living witness to what happened on Meridian Road who wasn't part of the attack." He let that settle. You don't know what you saw, but they don't know what you don't know, which makes you a loose end, she said. An emergency, he said. Damien turned to her. She met his eyes. In the firelight, they weren't concrete gray anymore. They were darker than that, and carrying something she recognized as the thing people carried when they were responsible for a situation they hadn't chosen and couldn't surrender. We need to move you tonight, he said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She thought about the apartment on Caldwell Street, the stack of bills, the uniform folded in the staff locker, the 4 years of being invisible and careful and small enough to fit inside the margins of someone else's world. She thought about the scar on her right palm. She thought about orange light and burning rubber and the cold of wet ground and the way the underside of metal looked when you were very young and very frightened and somehow, impossibly, moving toward a sound instead of away from it. I have a shift tomorrow morning, she said. No one in the room responded to that. I know, she said. I know. She pressed her palm flat against her thigh, the scarred one, felt the old familiar raised edge of it. Where? Damien opened his mouth to answer. The door came open, not knocked, opened. One of his men, the one from the corridor, she recognized him, stepped inside with the particular quality of urgency that had learned to present as calm. He said something in a language she didn't speak, low and fast, directly to Damien. Damien's face went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of something being received that was worse than expected. He looked at Elena. The man from the service corridor, he said. The one you spotted. Yes. He's been found. He paused. In the east stairwell. She waited. He didn't cut the power, Damien said. He was trying to get to the secondary panel to restore it. His voice was even and terrible. Someone else reached him first. The fire in the grate had settled back to a low, steady burn. Dr. Ansel had gone very still in her leather chair. Rourke was already moving toward the door, his hand inside his jacket. And Elena stood in the center of the East Library of Blackwood Manor in an emerald gown that wasn't hers, with a scar she'd stopped questioning and a past that was apparently a battlefield, and understood with complete and terrible clarity that the choice she'd thought she had, move, don't move, stay, go, believe him or don't, had already been made for her. 15 years ago, in the dark beneath a burning vehicle, an 8-year-old girl had moved towards something instead of away from it. Elena didn't remember making that choice, but whoever had been hunting the memory of it had just walked through the door of this building, and they had not come to negotiate. The east stairwell was 3 corridors away, and Elena could already smell it. That specific copper iron smell that she associated with nothing she could name consciously, but which her body recognized before her mind caught up. Her throat tightened. Her breathing went shallow and deliberate. Damien was already moving. His man, she'd learn later his name was Gregor, though tonight he was just the face that had delivered the information with trained calm, held the library door, and they filed through in a particular order that she understood was not accidental. Gregor first, then Damien, then Elena with Rourke behind her, close enough that she could hear him breathing. Dr. Ansel stayed in the library. No one asked her to. She simply read the room and stayed. The east stairwell was a service staircase, utilitarian concrete and iron railing, the kind of infrastructure that expensive renovations wallpapered over without improving. The emergency lighting here was better. Full white, not the red of the ballroom. And that made it worse in the specific way that clarity makes certain things worse. The man was at the base of the first landing, 30s, compact build, dark jacket. Rourke's man, the one from the service corridor, the one Elena had clocked moving against the crowd's current. He was sitting with his back against the wall in the posture of someone who'd been placed there, and he was breathing, which was the first thing she checked, and she checked it before she was aware of deciding to. He was breathing, but not fully conscious. His left side was wrong. She couldn't see the injury clearly, but his left arm was held differently than his right, and there was a wetness to the fabric of his jacket at the ribs that hadn't come from a cleaning supply. Rourke pushed past her and crouched in front of his man, 2 fingers at the throat, then a rapid assessment of the injury site. His face went through something she wasn't meant to see. A flash of something raw and brief, a man looking at someone he was responsible for, and then sealed itself back into controlled terrain. Knife, he said. Single entry. Missed the lung or he wouldn't be sitting up. He looked at Damien. Your people secure the floor above? Since 8 minutes ago. Then whoever did this is already out of the building. Or never left, Elena said. Both men looked at her. The crowd from the ballroom. 300 people trying to exit at the same time. Most of them not regular visitors to this building. If someone needed to move through that chaos and come back... She stopped. Looked at the injury, at the angle of it. This wasn't a fight. He didn't have time to defend himself. Someone came up behind him in the stairwell while he was moving toward the panel room. She looked at the door above them, then the landing below. They knew which direction he was going. They were already positioned. Rourke stood slowly. He was looking at her in a way she was becoming familiar with. The specific attention of a man recalculating something. You're doing it again, Damien said quietly, close to her ear. Doing what? Reading the space, the way my people read it. I'm just looking at what's there. Most people look at the body and stop seeing anything else. She didn't have an answer for that. Because he was right, and she knew he was right, and the knowing arrived with a low-frequency wrongness that she was learning to sit with rather than fight. The wrongness that said, this is familiar because it used to be yours and someone took it away from you before you could understand what it was. Gregor had a phone to his ear. Medical, from the sounds of it. Terse, locational, the vocabulary of someone summoning help rather than explaining a situation. We can't stay here, Damien said to Rourke. Agreed. I'm moving her tonight. I'm not negotiating that. Rourke looked at Elena, not asking permission. Looking at her the way you look at a situation that has become complicated in ways you hadn't fully modeled. She needs to be debriefed first. What she might remember, even fragments. She's not your asset, Rourke. I'm aware of what she is. Rourke's voice went flat. I'm also aware that every hour we don't know who's running this operation is an hour they have to move first. She's the only one who might have something. I don't remember anything, Elena said. Both men paused. I've told you, I have a fragment. Heat, light, cold ground. That's it. There's no tactical intelligence sitting in my memory waiting to be extracted. If there were, I'd tell you. Memory suppression after childhood trauma can preserve. I know what it can preserve. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. I also know that standing in a stairwell next to a man with a knife wound isn't how you access it. A beat. Rourke almost smiled. It looked foreign on his face. Fair point. The debrief can happen somewhere that isn't here, Damien said. We leave in 20 minutes. I need to check the vehicle situation and make 2 calls. He looked at Elena. Can you walk in that? She looked down at the gown. I walked here. I mean fast. Then I'll need something else. He looked at Gregor. Something passed between them, and Gregor peeled away toward the service corridor. Rourke crouched back down beside his man. Go, he said, without looking up. I'll deal with this and follow the process. You'll hear from me within 2 hours. He paused. Volkov. The name Vera Ansel mentioned. The reorganized records. Someone had access to the county medical system and to the foster care administration simultaneously. That's not a single actor. That's institutional reach. I know, Damien said. I want you to understand the scope of what you're walking into. I've understood it for 15 years. Rourke looked up then. His eyes moved between Damien and Elena once, twice, reading something in the geometry of how they were standing. Then you understand why finding her makes you more vulnerable, not less. He paused. Both of you. Gregor came back with a coat, long, dark, belonging to someone larger, and flat shoes that were a half size too big. Elena took them without comment, stripped the heels she'd borrowed back off, put on the flat shoes and the coat, and stopped being a woman in an emerald gown, and became instead a woman in an oversized coat over an emerald gown, which was not invisible, but was better. They moved through the service corridor, then the basement passage, then out through a loading exit that opened onto the building's east service road, which smelled like exhaust and damp concrete and the distant stink of a dumpster fire somewhere down the block. Real smell. Ground-level smell. Elena breathed it in and felt something in her chest unknot by a degree. 3 vehicles were waiting. Black, unmarked, the specific anonymity of cars that cost enough money to look like they cost none. Damien guided her toward the middle vehicle without touching her, a trajectory communicated through proximity rather than contact. She appreciated that without being fully sure why. Inside was warmer than she expected. The leather seats were real. A partition separated them from the driver. No one spoke for the first 4 minutes as the car moved through the city, taking turns that Elena tracked without looking out the window. She felt the direction in her body, a compass sense she'd always had, that she'd assumed was normal. Then Damien said, "What do you actually remember? From before the Caldwell foster home?" She'd been waiting for the question. She'd been building the answer during the 4 minutes of silence, sorting what was real from what was supplied, what she'd lived from what she'd been told she'd lived. "Margaret Caldwell told me I came to her when I was 9, Elena said. She said I'd been in a temporary placement before that, after a family situation. She didn't have details, or said she didn't. She looked at her hands in her lap, the right one with its scar that she now understood differently. I had nightmares for years. She called them growing pains, said all children from difficult starts had them." She paused. "The fragment I mentioned, orange light, cold ground, I've had that since as long as I can remember, but I thought everyone had something like that." "What else?" "I knew things," she said. It was the first time she'd said it that plainly, and it landed on the air between them with a weight she hadn't anticipated. "Things I hadn't been taught. I knew how to read a room, how to identify where the exits were, where the pressure points were in a space. I was good at understanding what people wanted before they said it. Margaret said I was perceptive." She stopped. "I thought I was perceptive." Damien was quiet for a moment. "You were trained," he said. "Whatever you were before the ambush, whoever your people were, you'd had early training, the kind that goes into muscle memory before conscious recall is fully developed. You can't suppress that with a records erasure. It lives in the body." "Who were my people?" she said. He looked out the window. The city moved past, wet with a light rain that had started without her noticing. "That's what I've been trying to determine," he said. "For 15 years. "And what have you found?" "Fragments," he said. "The same word you used." She looked at him. He was still looking out the window, his profile in the passing streetlight sharp, and carrying a tiredness she hadn't seen in him before, something he was only letting sit on his face now that the performance of the evening was officially over. "You've spent 15 years looking for a child you saw for what? Minutes?" she said. "In the dark, in the middle of an ambush." "I wasn't unconscious the whole time," he said. "I remember some of it." He paused. "I remember her. You." He corrected it without emphasis. "I remember you pulling at my arm and telling me to move. The way you said it. Not panicked. Instructions. Like you'd been taught to give them. I was 8. "Yes." He finally looked back at her. "Which is why I never stopped trying to find out who you were." The car slowed. They were in a district she didn't recognize. Older buildings, commercial ground floors with dark windows, residential above. The vehicle stopped in front of a building that had the specific unremarkable quality of a place chosen for invisibility. She got out into the light rain and looked at it. "Whose building?" she said. "Mine," Damien said. "Not connected to anything public." She nodded. Started toward the entrance. That was when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer it. Unknown number, middle of the night, and the night had already produced more unknown variables than she had processing space for. But the phone was in her coat pocket, her own coat that had been in her staff locker and which Gregor had retrieved along with the gown change, and the ring was real and present in a way that the night had mostly stopped being. She answered it. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice. Male, older, careful with its pacing in the way of a man who'd learned to front-load control in every interaction. "Elena Ashcroft," the voice said. Not a question. "Who is this?" she said. Damien had stopped walking and turned. He read her face, whatever was on it, and went still. "My name isn't important," the voice said. "What's important is that you understand your current situation more fully than the man standing next to you has allowed you to." A pause that was timed, not natural. I know where you are. I know who's with you. And I know what Damien Volkov has told you about the night on Meridian Road. Then you know more than I do, she said. Much more, the voice said, including the part he hasn't told you yet. Another pause. Ask him about the convoy, Ms. Ashcroft. Specifically, ask him why it was routed through Meridian County that night. That route wasn't standard. It wasn't necessary. Someone changed it 12 hours before the ambush. The voice went quieter, not softer. Someone who knew the change would be passed to the people planning the attack. She looked at Damien. He was 3 feet away and reading her face with an intensity that said he understood something was wrong without knowing the specifics. You're saying he knew, she said into the phone. I'm saying ask him, the voice said, and pay attention to how long it takes him to answer. The call ended. She lowered the phone. The rain was coming down harder. She could feel it on her face, in her hair. The emerald gown under the oversized coat, the 2 big shoes on the wet pavement. She felt the cold of the ground through the thin soles, and somewhere in the back of her mind that other cold moved. Wet ground against small palms, the cold of a night 15 years ago. Who was that? Damien said. She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she read rooms, pressure points, exits, the place where the structure was weakest. Tell me about the convoy route, she said, on Meridian Road. Tell me why it went that way. Something happened in his face. Very small. Very fast. There and then gone. But she saw it. She had always been good at seeing things. Where did that question come from? He said. Answer it. Elena, answer it. Her voice came out flat and cold and more certain than she felt. The route was changed before the ambush. Someone changed it. Who? The rain on the pavement, the sound of a distant car. Damien Volkov, who she had spent 3 hours reading and had come to understand as a man who carried weight responsibly, whose stillness was the product of self-discipline rather than deception. Damien Volkov looked at the wet pavement between them and said nothing. And in that silence, which stretched 4 seconds, then 5, then 6, Elena felt something she'd been building since the ballroom, the structure of it, the logic of it, the sense of something real finally arriving after 4 years of margins, begin to crack at the foundation. You knew about the route change, she said. It's more complicated than, did you know? He looked up. His eyes were the concrete gray she'd cataloged in the ballroom, flat, functional, real. Yes, he said, but not what I knew now, not what I understand now. I need you to let me explain. She took a step back, then another. The wall of the building was behind her, and she stopped when she felt it, solid and cold through the coat. You knew the route was changed, she said. Someone told the attackers. 11 of your men died. Her voice was absolutely level in the way that something is level when it has been pressed flat by pressure rather than being naturally smooth. And a child almost died with them. I didn't know about the child. You knew the route was changed and your men still took it. I was given assurances. I was told the change came from my own logistics team. I believed. He stopped. His jaw worked. I made a mistake, a catastrophic one. And I have spent 15 years trying to understand who used me to make it. Used you? The words came out like something she was tasting for poison. Someone handed your convoy to attackers, and you drove it into the kill zone, and 11 people died. Yes. And then you spent 15 years looking for a child who saved you from the consequences of your own error. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of the stairwell, not the silence of the library. This was the silence of something structural, something load-bearing, giving way. Elena, he said. Don't, she said. She looked at the building he'd brought her to. Anonymous, secure, invisible. His building. His territory. His rules, his information, his version of the 15 years she couldn't remember. She was standing in the rain in shoes that didn't fit with the scar she was only beginning to understand and no past worth the name, in the middle of a story that everyone around her had been reading for 15 years while she'd been polishing silver and counting exits and wondering why she always counted exits. And the man who'd had 15 years to find the answer, the man whose mistake had set everything in motion, had just spent 3 words confirming what a stranger's voice on a phone had taken 10 seconds to suggest. She needed to think. She needed space to think, which she did not have, because she was standing in front of his building in his coat, in his territory, and her options for independent space were exactly as limited as they'd been since she'd put on that gown. Which was, she was beginning to understand, exactly as limited as they'd been for 15 years. The voice on the phone. Unknown number. Timed pauses. Information delivered with the precision of someone who'd prepared it, someone who knew where she was, and who was with her, and what she'd been told, and what she hadn't been told. Someone who'd known tonight would happen and had been positioned for it. She thought, this could be the other side of the same trap. She thought, the phone call could be the manipulation, and Damien's answer could be the most honest thing that's happened tonight. She thought, or the reverse, or both. Or something she didn't have a framework for yet because she was standing in the rain with 6 hours of information trying to fill a 15-year hole, and every person she'd spoken to tonight had a reason to show her a particular version of the truth. She pressed her scarred palm against the cold wall of the building. Who changed the route? She said. Her voice was quieter now, not softer, more deliberate. 15 years ago. Who gave the order? Damien looked at her. Rain was coming down on both of them now, flattening his hair, darkening the shoulders of his jacket. I didn't know his name then, he said. And now? A beat. Magnus Varga, he said. The name landed in the wet dark between them, and Elena didn't recognize it and did not pretend to. He was inside your operation, she said. Close enough to the inside that the difference didn't matter. And he's still operational, yes. Damien said it like swallowing something with sharp edges. He's been operational for 15 years because I couldn't prove what I knew without a witness. And the only witness... He stopped. She finished it for him. Was a child with no memory and no records. Yes. The rain, the wet pavement, the specific cold of ground she was standing on, and the ghost of another cold ground, another night, the smell of burning rubber and copper, and the sound of something she'd been moving toward instead of away from. Damien said, I should have told you everything in the library, before the phone call. I know that. He stopped again. The word he was looking for wasn't coming easily. I was afraid of what you'd do if you knew the mistake was mine before you knew the rest of it. So you managed the information. Yes. The way everyone in my life has managed the information. He had no answer for that. She looked at the building again, at the door, at the geometry of the situation, his building, her options, the rain that was now soaking through the coat to the gown beneath. She thought about the voice on the phone, timed pauses, prepared information, someone who'd waited until this exact moment to make the call. She thought, Magnus Varga. She thought, someone wants me in motion, panicking, running from Damien, running towards something, running in a direction someone has already prepared for me. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had moved towards something instead of away from it. She thought about what kind of training produces that response in an 8-year-old. She looked at Damien and said, I'm not going anywhere tonight. She said it evenly. Not because I trust you. I don't. Not fully. Not yet. She pushed off the wall and moved past him toward the building door. But because whoever made that phone call wants me running, and I'm done moving in directions other people have prepared. She reached the door, stopped with her hand on it. Tomorrow, she said, without turning around. You tell me everything. Not the version that protects your reputation, everything. Starting with Magnus Varga and ending with whoever is in that building you trust enough to bring me here. She pushed the door open. And if I find out you've managed one more piece of information before I ask for it. She didn't finish the sentence. She let the door swing open into the lit interior and walked through it. And if her hands were shaking slightly at the wrists, it was from cold and not from fear. Or at least that was what she chose in that moment. The room they gave her was on the 3rd floor. Clean, spare, the kind of functional that came from deliberate choice rather than poverty. A bed, a lamp, a window with the blinds already drawn. Someone had left a change of clothes folded on the chair, Plain dark pants, a gray shirt, thick socks, her size approximately. She didn't ask how they knew. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for 2 hours and thought. Not about Damien specifically, not about the phone call, or the stairwell, or the man in the service corridor with the knife wound at his ribs. She thought about structure. She laid out what she knew, the way she'd once laid out the silver service for Table 1. Each piece in its exact place, no substitutions, no gaps papered over. What she had was this: a name, Magnus Varga. A location in the past, Meridian Road, a gap of 15 years during which someone had maintained the architecture of her erasure, records gone, witnesses moved, a foster mother who may have known more than she said, and a present in which multiple parties, with competing interests, had converged on a single gala on a single night, which was not coincidence. Convergence required a cause. She fell asleep sitting up at some point before 4 in the morning and woke with a start at 6 when something changed in the building's sound. A door, distant footsteps, voices below with the tight rhythm of urgent conversation. She was dressed and at the door before she was fully awake. The ground floor was a controlled chaos that was trying very hard to look like order. 4 of Damien's people stood around a central table covered in laptops and printed photographs. Gregor was on a phone in the corner. Damien stood at the table's edge with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was the first time she'd seen him look like a man rather than a composition, and he looked worse for it, gray at the edges, the specific worn quality of someone who'd been awake all night with bad news for company. He looked up when she came in. Varga moved last night, he said. No preamble. He'd promised her everything and he was starting it here at 6 in the morning without being asked. 2 of his primary financial accounts were liquidated between midnight and 4. That's not standard. That's someone who knows the clock has changed. She crossed to the table. The photographs were surveillance images, grainy, long lens, the kind taken from distance. She looked at them without touching. He knows I'm with you. He knew before last night. The gala confirmed it for him. Damien's finger moved to a photograph near the center. A man in it, caught mid-stride outside what looked like a parking structure. Heavy build, 60s, expensive coat worn open over a suit. The face was partially turned from the camera, but what she could see of it had the quality of someone accustomed to being the largest gravity in any room. That's Varga, from 8 days ago. He hasn't been photographed since. He's already moving. He's already moved. Gregor came off the phone, crossed to the table. The shipyard. He said it to Damien. Our contact confirmed it 2 minutes ago. Varga pulled the access permits under a shell company 6 weeks back. He's been staging there for at least a month. Which shipyard? Elena said. Both men looked at her. She'd asked it the way she'd asked where the exits were. Automatically, functionally, because location was data and data was the material you worked with. Riverside Industrial District, Damien said slowly. Abandoned commercial port. 3 miles from here. She looked at the map already open on the nearest laptop, found the river, found the district. Her eyes moved across the terrain the way they'd moved across the ballroom. Not consciously mapping, just receiving. Loading dock access from the South Road, rail line on the east that would have been used for cargo containers. The containers themselves would still be there, partially or fully. That kind of infrastructure didn't clear fast. He picked it because of the containers, she said. Visibility control. You can move people and equipment between container stacks without open-air exposure, multiple defensive positions, limited aerial sight lines. Damien was looking at her with that specific look again, the one she'd stopped trying to deflect. We believe he has between 12 and 16 men on site, he said. Armed, professional, not street level. How many do you have? 8 here. 4 more I can reach in 40 minutes. 12 against 16 in his chosen terrain, she said. That's not a confrontation, that's an execution. I know the math, Damien said. Then what's the plan? The plan is being built. His voice stayed even, but there was something under it, something that wasn't patience, but was wearing patience as a coat. Rourke is bringing documentation, financial records, communication intercepts. Enough to make a legal case if we can get Varga in custody rather than in a body bag. You want him alive. I want what he knows. The network, the names, the people who've been running interference for him for 15 years. A dead Varga is a solved problem. A live Varga is a key. And if he doesn't want to be a key? Damien looked at the photograph of Magnus Varga caught mid-stride in a parking structure 8 days ago. Then the math changes, he said. Rourke arrived at 7:40 with a woman Elena hadn't met. Late 40s, sharp, introducing herself as Sable without offering a last name or a context. She carried a hard case that she set on the table and opened without ceremony, revealing a rack of drives and a portable processing unit that she connected to the existing laptops with the focused efficiency of someone doing a job she'd done many times. Financial architecture, Sable said, not to anyone specifically. Varga's shell network. 14 entities across 6 jurisdictions. The key thread is a holding company called Arch & Capital. It's the one that routed payments to the people who reorganized the county records. She pulled up a screen, numbers and account strings Elena's eye moved across, and partially understood in ways she couldn't account for. The payments were made in 2 tranches. First tranche, 15 years ago. Second tranche, 3 years later. Probably when they were verifying the erasure had held. Who received the second tranche? Damien said. Sable's finger stopped on a line. The administrator for the foster care placement service that handled Elena's case. She said it without looking at Elena, which Elena appreciated. He retired 4 months after the payment, left the state. We haven't located him. Elena looked at the number, at the date, at the architecture of it. Money moving through shells through time, the machinery of her non-existence running on a budget, maintained like infrastructure. Someone had paid to keep her gone. Someone had been checking, 3 years later, to make sure she'd stayed gone. She thought about Margaret Caldwell, small woman, patient hands, the smell of lavender and practical soap, who had taken in a 9-year-old with no past and called her nightmares growing pains and never asked questions Elena couldn't answer. Who had died 4 years ago of a heart condition, quietly, with Elena at her bedside. She thought, did you know? The full version. Did you know, and did you choose me anyway? Or did you choose me because someone paid you to? She thought, I will never know. And she set it down, not because it didn't matter, but because she had no room for it right now, and she would need to pick it up later when she had room, which required there being a later. We need to move before noon, Gregor said. After that, Varga's window for transfer opens. If he moves to secondary, he won't transfer today, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. She looked at the map. He moved his money last night. That's not a man preparing to run. That's a man preparing to stay and finish something. He liquidated because he doesn't expect to need the financial architecture after today. He's not running. He's closing. She looked at Damien. He thinks last night confirmed something for him. He thinks you're compromised, Doc. That you've got a liability now, someone you're protecting that you shouldn't be protecting. He's betting you won't move fast because you're managing me. She paused. He's wrong about the liability, but he might be right about the timing. Damien held her eyes for a moment. Then he looked at Gregor. 2 hours, he said. Move the people. I want eyes on the shipyard in 45 minutes. Gregor moved. Sable began pulling drives. Rourke, who had been standing at the wall through the briefing with his arms crossed and his face doing that complicated calculation it did when situations were outpacing his models, looked at Elena. You're going, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. You understand what the site will be. I understand what any site is, she said. I just don't know yet how I know that. He nodded slowly. The debrief I mentioned. After, she said. Chat. The riverside shipyard in the rain looked like the end of something, like the physical location where industries went when they stopped being viable. Massive, skeletal, the bones of old commerce stripped to their structure by weather and neglect. The main gate had been chained for years, the chains now rusted to the color of old blood. Beyond it, the container stacks rose in irregular formations, 20, 30 feet, painted in the faded corporate colors of companies that no longer existed. Between them, narrow lanes of wet concrete where standing water reflected the low gray sky. They entered from the south. 4 vehicles, separated, staggered. Elena was in the third vehicle with Damien and a man named Peter, who had the quietest hands she'd seen on anyone carrying a weapon. Nobody spoke during the approach. The sounds were engine, rain, the distant creak of metal expanding in wet air. They stopped 200 meters from the main container field, on foot from there. Damien moved to her side before she got out. "Stay within my sight line," he said. "I'm not a protection detail," she said. "I know what you are." He said it without heat. "I'm asking you to stay within my sight line, because if something happens to you in the next hour, 15 years of work fails. That's the practical version." He paused. "The other version is that I've spent 15 years responsible for what happened to you, and I'm not capable of being rational about your exposure. Take whichever reason works." She looked at him, the rain on his face, the tiredness he'd stopped hiding sometime in the last hour. "Within your sight line," she said. "I'll do what I can." The container field was everything she'd expected. Tight lanes, overhead cover, noise from the rain on the metal that masked footsteps and turned sound directional and unreliable. They moved in 4 pairs, spread across separate lanes, Gregor's voice coming through earpieces and clipped coordinates. Then the first shot. Not at them. Somewhere ahead and left, a single shot, controlled, the report bouncing between the containers until its direction was meaningless. Then shouting, male voices, more than one. And then Gregor's voice in the earpiece saying contact north lane, and then everything went from controlled advance to controlled emergency in the space of 4 seconds. Elena flattened against a container wall. Damien was 3 feet to her right, weapon up, reading the lane ahead. Peter was behind her. "North," she said. "I heard," Damien said. "Not the contact. The shot came from north, and it wasn't aimed at us." She listened. The rain, the metal creak. The distant shouting was resolving now, not into a firefight. The voices were directing, not panicking. "They knew we were coming. They let us in." Damien's jaw went tight. "They didn't clear the south entrance because they wanted us in the container field," she said. "The lanes are their advantage. They know the layout. We're navigating blind." "Then we need the layout." "I need 90 seconds and a height advantage," she said. He looked at her. At the container wall beside them. 40 feet of rust-stained metal with a ladder on its near face, the kind welded for maintenance access, running to the top. "Elena?" She was already moving. The ladder was wet and the rungs were narrow and the rust bit into her palms through the raw edges. But she climbed fast, faster than she expected, her body finding the rhythm of it before her mind caught up. "Don't look down. Look up. Next rung. Next." The rain hit harder at height, nothing to break it, cold through the gray shirt in seconds. She reached the top and went flat. The container field spread below her and she read it the way she'd read the ballroom. Total, simultaneous, every moving piece landing in her awareness at once. Varga's men were in the east lanes. She counted 8 visible, 2 on elevated positions on containers further in, the rest at ground level with the lanes covered. Their sightlines crossed in the center of the field, overlapping coverage designed to catch movement between lane openings. There was a gap. South center, where 2 container stacks met at an angle that left a dead zone approximately 12 feet wide. A straight line through that dead zone reached a structure at the field's heart. A converted cargo office, metal-walled, 1 door facing west. Light in the window. Occupied. Varga. She memorized the positions, the gaps, the angles. Then she came back down the ladder with her palms bleeding from the rust and her heart hitting the inside of her ribs with the flat sound of something working very hard. Damien caught her at the bottom, not dramatically, just a hand at her elbow, steadying. She didn't shake it off. "South center," she said, quietly and fast. "Dead zone between stacks 7 and 8 from our position. 12 feet of clear approach. Office at the field center, west-facing door. He's in there." She looked at Damien. 2 elevated shooters east side. They'll have the office in their sight. Anyone who approaches that door from outside the dead zone is exposed. Damien's eyes had gone very focused. He was processing it, running the geometry. He touched his earpiece and started giving instructions in low, fast phrases, coordinates and timing, the language of men who'd built this vocabulary over years. Then the second shot came. This one was aimed. It hit the container 6 inches above Damien's head, and the sound of it was enormous in the metal space, a percussion that rang in Elena's back teeth. Petter returned fire immediately, controlled, 2 shots east. Someone at the end of the lane went down. Not from Peter's shots, she thought, but from something on the far side, one of Damien's other pairs coming through. Then it was not individual shots anymore. It was overlapping, the sound of it filling the container field and bouncing back distorted, impossible to count, impossible to locate. Someone was shouting Gregor's name in the earpiece. Damien grabbed her wrist and they were moving. The dead zone, the only objective, south center, get through the gap before the elevated shooters recalibrated. She ran. Concrete wet under her feet, rain full in her face, the container walls flashing past. Damien beside her, not ahead of her, not behind, beside, Petter covering their back. The gap in the containers arrived and they pushed through it, and she was right about the 12 feet of cover, right about the dead zone, right about all of it, and she didn't have time to find that frightening. The cargo office door was 20 meters ahead. 15. 10. Damien's hand came out, stopping her. He went to the wall beside the door, back flat, and she did the same without being told, mirroring him, and she understood that she was doing it correctly, and that the correctness came from somewhere she couldn't name. Voices inside. One she didn't know. One she did. Dr. Ansel. Elena's blood went cold. She looked at Damien. His face was doing something she hadn't seen before. A fracturing, brief and violent, there and gone. He'd heard it too. She was in the library, Elena said, low, barely breath. She was supposed to leave with Rourke. She didn't leave with Rourke. He looked at the door, then at Elena. Something passed through his eyes, like the 15 years of it, the weight of what he'd built and what he'd failed and what tonight was costing. He looked at her and said quietly and with an honesty that had no performance in it, I'm going through that door. I know, she said. If Varga has her as leverage, then leverage only works if you hesitate. She met his eyes. Don't hesitate. His jaw set. He looked at her for one more second, really looked, the way people look when they're recording something. And then he moved. The door came open hard and fast, and Elena went through it 2 seconds behind him, and the scene inside the cargo office was exactly as bad as the sounds had suggested, and worse than either of them had prepared for. Magnus Varga was standing at the room's center, larger in person than the surveillance photograph had suggested. Not tall, but dense, the gravity of him real and physical. The kind of man who filled a room not through presence, but through the sense that the room had been arranged around him before you arrived. He was looking at the door with the expression of a man who had been waiting. Doctor. Vera Ansel was to his left. Standing, not bound, but the man behind her had a hand at her shoulder that communicated everything a restraint would have without using one. She was very pale and very still, and her hands were folded in her lap in the same deliberate stillness Elena had seen in the library. 2 more men at the walls, weapons drawn and leveled. Damien stopped in the center of the room. Weapon up, but the math was already wrong. Shit. 2 on him, 1 on Ansel, and Peter had been left outside to hold the approach. Varga looked at Elena. You're smaller than I expected, he said. His accent was faint and placed, Eastern European, older than Damien's, settled. The voice of a man who'd lived many places and retained the DNA of all of them. Elena said nothing. I've been looking at a file with your name on it for 15 years, he said. Every 6 months or so, I'd check the status, confirm the erasure was holding, confirm the subject was contained. He tilted his head. You were a housekeeper. I found that almost admirable. All that potential, all that training in the blood, and you were carrying someone else's dirty linen. He looked at Damien. You've told her about the convoy. Yes, Damien said. Then she knows you're the reason she spent 15 years without a name. The room held its breath. Elena felt it, the lever quality of what Varga was doing, the precision of it. Not just threatening, reconstructing, laying the story back together in a shape that served him. What I know, Elena said, is that you orchestrated an ambush that killed 11 people and tried to kill 2 others, and then spent 15 years maintaining the cover for it. She held his eyes. Everything else is detail. Varga looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face changed quality, not softened, but recalibrated. "The child," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "The child is still in there." "The child grew up," Elena said. "Yes." He let out a breath that was almost a sigh. "That's the problem." He looked at his two men and said one word she didn't understand, and they shifted their weapons, and in the half-second before the room became something irreversible, Elena looked at Damien, and Damien looked at her, and she saw in his face that he was about to do something that would probably work and would definitely cost him, and she made a decision faster than thought. She moved left, hard and fast, not away from Varga, but toward the man behind Ansel. The restraining hand, the structural weakness, the load-bearing point of the room's logic. 3 steps, her body dropping low, the geometry of it arriving not from thought but from somewhere older and more reliable than thought. She hit the man's center of mass with her shoulder and took them both sideways into the wall, and the hand came off Ansel's shoulder and Ansel moved because she was smart enough to move when the opening came and the room exploded into motion. A shot. High, hitting the ceiling. Damien, moving on the 2 armed men simultaneously, Peter coming through the door from outside. Elena on the floor with the man she'd tackled, his arm coming around and her forearm blocking it, the block arriving in her body from somewhere that predated memory, and she was using it. She was using it without deciding to. The man was bigger than her by 60 pounds, and none of it was soft. His elbow came back hard and caught her across the cheekbone, and the world went white for a half-second. Pure white. No sound. No weight. Then sound came back. Gunshot. Damien's voice. Something hitting the floor. And the white resolved back into the close, ugly geometry of a cargo office floor and a man trying to get his arm under her throat. She didn't let him. Her left hand found his wrist before the arm completed its arc. She redirected it outward, not fighting the force, working with it, turning his own momentum into the wall, and her right elbow went into his solar plexus with everything she had. Not technique, not training recalled. Physics, mass, the hard fact of an elbow moving into the place where a body stores its breath. He folded. She was up before he finished folding. The cargo office was 3 seconds into chaos, and the chaos had a shape. Petter had come through the door and taken the far-right man at the wall, and they were grappling in the corner by the window, and the window was shuddering from the contact. Damien had the second wall man disarmed, weapon on the floor, the man's arm wrenched behind him at an angle that allowed compliance but not comfort, and he was holding that position and scanning the room simultaneously. Magnus Varga had not moved. He was still at the room's center, and he was watching Elena, and the expression on his face was the thing that stopped her for the half-second it stopped her. Not fear, not calculation, but something that looked almost like recognition. The look of a man seeing a variable he had predicted and hoped wouldn't arrive. "You should sit down," Elena said to him. Her voice came out rough. The cheekbone was already swelling. She could feel it tightening the skin around her eye. Varga looked past her at his man still struggling to find his feet, then at Damien, then at Peter coming off the far-right man who had stopped moving. He looked at the door where Gregor was now visible, filling the frame with 2 of the others behind him. He looked at the room he had set up and the room that had arrived instead. He sat down. Not on the floor. On the metal chair against the wall, deliberate, with the particular dignity of a man choosing the frame of his own defeat rather than having it chosen for him. He straightened his jacket, folded his hands in his lap, looked at Elena with those recalibrated eyes. "The child from Meridian Road," he said. "Stop calling me that," she said. He was quiet a moment. "What would you prefer?" "My name," she said, "which you already know." "Elena Ashcroft," he said, "which is not the name you were born with." The cargo office had gone very still around them. Rain on the metal roof, the sound of Peter zip-tying the man in the corner, Damien standing with the second man secured, watching Varga with an attention that had been 15 years in the building. "Then tell me the name I was born with," Elena said. Varga looked at her for a long moment. She held the look and didn't flinch from it and didn't move, and her cheekbone was screaming at her and her palms were torn from the ladder and she was standing in a container yard in the pouring rain wearing a gray shirt that was soaked through, and none of that touched her. "Oren," he said finally. "Your mother's name was Oren. She was a courier, one of mine for a short period, before she understood the full scope of what that meant and tried to leave." He said it without effect, the way you state data. "She was moving you to safety the night of the Meridian Road convoy. Wrong road, wrong timing." He paused. "She didn't survive the ambush." The rain on the roof. Elena looked at him. She felt the information arrive in the place where she'd been keeping the gap. The 9-year gap. The years before Caldwell Street. The before. It didn't fill the gap. It gave the gap a shape. And that was different, and worse in some ways, and more real in all of them. "You killed my mother," she said. "The ambush killed many people," he said. "I orchestrated the ambush." "Don't do that," she said. "Don't use passive construction for things you did actively." Something moved through Varga's eyes, brief and human and gone. "Yes," he said. "I killed your mother." She breathed, in and out, felt the swelling at her cheekbone, heard the rain. "Why the erasure?" she said. "If you didn't know I survived?" "I didn't know immediately," he said. "I learned 6 months later. A hospital record that surfaced through a contact, an unidentified child, female, approximately 8 years old, found at the Meridian Road site. Head injury, memory disruption, already in foster placement." He uncrossed and recrossed his hands in his lap. "I had someone look at the girl, assess the risk. The memory disruption was severe enough that it was decided she was low priority, but my financial administrator was thorough. He arranged for the records to be reorganized in case the memory ever returned." He looked at Elena. "I told myself it was precautionary. I knew what it was." Damien's voice came from behind her, very quiet. "Who else knew she survived?" "No one who is still a problem," Varga said. "The phone call last night," Elena said. "Unknown number. Someone warned me about the convoy route. Who was that?" Varga's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, reassessing. "Not one of mine," he said. "Then who?" He looked at her. "There are people who've wanted this conversation to happen for a long time. People who've been building toward tonight for reasons of their own." His eyes moved to Damien. "Your operation has more parties interested in its outcome than you've allowed for, Volkov. I am not the only one who's been watching." "Names," Damien said. "I'll give you everything," Varga said. "The full network, the accounts, the routes, the arrangements that are still running. Everything I know about who's been running parallel to you without your awareness." He paused. "In exchange for one condition." "You're not negotiating," Damien said. "I'm not negotiating, I'm requesting." Varga looked at Elena, at her specifically, not at Damien. "I want to tell her what I know about her mother, not what's in a file, what I know personally, before anything else happens tonight." He held Elena's eyes. "She deserves to know who Oren was, and there's no one left to tell her except me." The cargo office was very still. Elena felt Damien's presence at her back, not touching her, not directing her, just there, present, letting her have the choice. She looked at Magnus Varga, the man who had killed her mother, who had spent 15 years maintaining the architecture of her erasure, who was sitting in a metal chair in a rain-loud cargo office, looking at her with the eyes of a man who was very tired and very old and had run out of frames for his defeat. "Tell me," she said. "Tell." It took 40 minutes. She stood the whole time. Varga sat. Damien's people moved around the outside of the space, securing the site, and Gregor came and went twice, and at some point someone brought a tarp against the roof leak that had opened above the east corner, and none of it touched the 40 minutes. Varga talked. He talked about Oren. Her real name had been Oren Vass, and she'd been 26 when she died, and she'd been a linguist before she'd been a courier, and she'd had, according to Varga, the specific quality of someone who saw the shape of things before others did. He talked about how she'd been recruited, how she'd served, how she'd eventually understood the scale of what she was part of and decided she wouldn't be part of it anymore. He talked about the child she'd been moving that night, not toward safety exactly, he said, but toward someone she trusted. He didn't know who. He'd never found out. Elena listened. She received each piece of information the way she'd received everything tonight. Totally. carefully, filing it in the place it belonged. She didn't cry, not because she was suppressing it, but because she was too far into something operational to find the room for it. She knew the room was there, yet she'd find it later. At the end, Varga said, "She was not the worst person I knew, which is probably the most honest thing I can say about someone and the least adequate." Elena said nothing. "I'm sorry," Varga said. "That's also inadequate." "It is," she said. "But I heard it." Mummed. Rourke arrived with 2 vehicles and 4 additional people at 8:40. His people, not Damien's, different posture, different equipment, the kind of people who carried documentation in addition to weapons and used both in the same day. Varga was transferred to Rourke's custody with the financial records and the drives Sable had built, and the full confession Gregor had recorded on the phone propped against a water bottle during the 40 minutes. Legal architecture, Rourke called it. The kind that didn't collapse under pressure. The kind that put people in rooms they didn't get out of through connections or money. Elena stood outside in the rain while the transfer happened. The container field was wet and enormous and empty feeling, the way large spaces feel after the people who filled them have gone. The fire in the far east section had burned itself down to a low smolder, and the smoke mixed with the rain into something that smelled like the end of things. Damien came and stood beside her. They were quiet for a while. "Oren Vass," she said. "Yes." "Did you know that name before tonight?" "No," he said. "I knew there was a woman in the convoy who wasn't one of my people. I didn't know who she was or why she was there." He paused. "I should have investigated more thoroughly. I told myself there was nothing to find." "There was never nothing to find," she said. "You just didn't want to find it." He was quiet. "That's not an accusation," she said. "It's accurate. There's a difference." The rain came down on the container stacks and made its percussion on the metal and ran off in streams along the lanes in the directions gravity required. Elena watched the water run. "Rourke's going to want the debrief," she said. "Rourke can wait." "No, he can't. And neither can the legal process. If Varga's network is as extensive as he said, there are people right now who are watching to see what happened here tonight and deciding what to do next." She turned to look at Damien. His face was wet, his hair flat against his forehead, and the tiredness was fully visible now. The 15 years of it, wearing through the surface. "The debrief has to happen today. Everything I can give him, which may be more than I think I have. The memory may not come back all at once." "It's already coming back," she said. "It's been coming back since the gala. Pieces. The cold ground. The burning vehicle. I know what that is now." She looked back at the container field. "I know what I was doing in that convoy, approximately." "What were you doing?" She considered how to say it. How to say, "I think I was already trained. I think whoever my mother was taking me to had already started working with me. And the skills are in the body even though the memories aren't. And that's why I count exits and read rooms and knew what your men were doing in the ballroom before I understood that I knew." How to say, "The child you've been looking for was already something before the ambush. And what she was is coming back to her, and she doesn't know yet whether to be grateful or frightened by that." "Learning," she said. "I think I was learning." Damien looked at her, the rain, the smolder in the east field. "Rourke's debrief," he said. And then I need a week," she said, "alone. Not in hiding, not in one of your buildings, not in a situation someone else has arranged. I need a week in a place I choose where no one knows where I am except me." She paused. "I need to find out what I know and what I don't know and what I'm going to do with the difference." He was quiet for a moment. "The people Varga mentioned, the ones watching the operation. We'll still be there in a week," she said. "They've been there for 15 years. 7 days won't change what they're going to do." She looked at him. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I need." He held her eyes. Then he said, "Okay." Just that. She nodded once. The debrief with Rourke took 6 hours and she gave him everything. Not just the fragments that had returned during the night, but the patterns. The exit counting, the posture reading, the instinctive tactical geometry, the things her body knew that her mind had filed as personality rather than training. Sable recorded and cross-referenced. Rourke asked questions that were precise and non-leading, and she answered them with the same precision. It was the most honest conversation she'd had in 15 years, and it exhausted her in a way the cargo office fight hadn't. At some point in the fourth hour, she said, "I want to know who made the phone call." Rourke looked at her. "I have a theory." "Tell me." "There are two people I know of who've wanted Varga exposed for longer than Damien has. Both of them have had the resources to watch and wait. One of them knew who you were before tonight, probably has known for years, has been tracking you without making contact." He paused. "The call was designed to destabilize your trust in Damien at the exact moment you were most vulnerable to it. That's not a person who wanted to help you. That's a person who wanted Damien isolated and you in motion." "They didn't succeed," she said. "No," Rourke said. "They didn't, because you were smart enough to recognize the shape of a manipulation even while you were inside it." He looked at her with the complicated expression she'd seen on him since the first corridor of Blackwood Manor. "That's not something you learn as an adult, Ms. Ashcroft." "I know," she said. She knew. The week she took was in a rented room on the coast, 4 hours from the city, a place she'd found through a cash transaction and a name she'd used once and immediately retired. The room had a window that faced the water and a bed and a bathroom and a kettle. She brought 2 changes of clothes and a notebook and nothing that connected her to anything. For the first 2 days she slept, not the fractured alert half-sleep of the last several years, but the real kind, heavy and dreamless, the sleep of a body that had been running on cortisol for longer than it acknowledged. On the 3rd day, the memories started coming in a way they hadn't before. Not the fragment, not the cold ground and the orange light, though those came too, and now they came with context, with the before and the after that had been missing. They came with a woman's voice she recognized without hearing it since before she could form reliable memories. They came with the specific smell of a coat that had been her mother's. They came with the image of a building she didn't know but could describe in enough detail to find someday. She wrote things down in the notebook. Not for Rourke's debrief, that had been thorough and she'd given him what he needed. For herself. Because she was Orrin Vass's daughter, and Orrin Vass had been a linguist before she was a courier, and had apparently understood that writing things down was how you held on to the things that mattered. On the 5th day, Damien sent a message. 1 line. Varga has been formally charged. 6 additional arrests in the network. Rourke says the architecture is holding. She read it twice. Wrote back 1 word. Good. On the 6th day, she sat at the window and watched the water for a long time, and thought about what came next. Not in the tactical way she'd been thinking all week, laying out pieces and checking the gaps, but in the larger and less structured way that didn't have a method. The way you think about a life. She thought about the emerald gown, which was presumably still in the Blackwood Manor wardrobe or had been returned to wherever it had come from. She thought about her apartment on Caldwell Street and the stack of bills on the kitchen table. She thought about the uniform, white blouse, black skirt, hair pulled back, and about the 4 years of margins, of being invisible, of existing in the spaces between other people's importance. She thought about the cleaning supply burn on her right index finger, which she'd had for 2 years, and about the scar on her right palm, which she'd had for 15, and about what it meant that she'd looked at both of them her whole life and explained them with the stories that were available rather than the stories that were true. She thought about Orrin Vass, who had been 26 years old and had known what she was part of and had decided she wouldn't be part of it anymore, and who had been moving her daughter toward someone she trusted on a night that went wrong in ways no one could have predicted. She thought, you were brave. And then she thought, I know where I got it. And she held that for a long time because she'd never had anything like it before. The specific weight of knowing where something came from, having an inheritance. On the 7th day, she drove back to the city. She met Damien at a coffee shop on Hendrick Street that was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years and didn't care about being fashionable. Formica tables, a counter with actual stools, coffee that arrived in a heavy mug without ceremony. She was there first. She ordered coffee and waited and looked out the window at the street and counted the exits once, automatically, and then smiled at the count without particularly deciding to. He came in at the time she'd said. He found her without looking around the room first, which meant he'd assessed it from the door before she'd clocked his arrival. They were alike in that way, she was starting to understand. In a number of ways, she was still cataloging. He sat across from her, ordered coffee when the waitress came. The waitress left and they were quiet in the particular way of people who have things to say and are deciding the order. "The foundation," he said finally. She'd had a version of this conversation in her head for several days. "Tell me what it is." "It was my mother's project originally. Humanitarian aid, primarily. Legal aid, education access, shelter programs in the eastern districts. It's been running for 11 years on the margins of everything else." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "It's well-funded. It has good people in it, but it's been managed at arm's length. Nobody at the center of it has treated it as the main thing." He paused. "I want to change that. I want someone running it who understands what it's for." "You want it separated from the rest of the operation," she said. "Completely. Different legal entity, different board, different public profile. Nothing that connects it to the family structure." He looked at her. "It should be what it says it is." "What does it say it is?" "A foundation that protects vulnerable people," he said. "That is genuinely what it is. That's what I want it to be more fully." He paused. "And I want it run by someone who knows what vulnerable people actually need, not in the abstract, in the practical, daily, unglamorous way." Elena drank her coffee. It was good coffee, heavy and real. Outside the window, the city moved in the morning light. Ordinary people on ordinary errands, existing in the margins of no one's world but their own. "I'm not qualified in any conventional way," she said. "I know. I have no degrees in nonprofit administration, no established credentials. I know. And the people on the foundation's board, and the people who fund it, and the people who watch everything connected to your name, they'll have opinions." "They will," he said, "and they'll be wrong." She looked at him. The morning light through the coffee shop window was ordinary and clear, the kind of light that didn't do anything dramatic. His face in it was tired and real and not performing anything. "I want legal autonomy," she said. "Full board authority. Not advisory. Decision-making." "Yes." "I want to hire my own people. I want the financial architecture audited by someone I choose before I sign anything. I want 6 months of operational review before I commit to a longer term." "All of that," he said, "is reasonable." She held the mug in both hands and looked at the street. A woman was walking a dog. A man was unlocking a storefront. 2 kids were doing something complicated on a bicycle that probably wasn't permitted on that sidewalk, life happening in its ordinary weight. "My mother spent her life working for something she eventually decided she couldn't endorse," Elena said. "She tried to get out. She didn't make it." She looked at Damien. "I'm not my mother. I'm also not whatever I was before Meridian Road. I'm someone who polished silver and counted exits for 4 years and has a great deal yet to figure out about what I know and don't know." She put the mug down. "But I understand what it is to need something and not have access to it. I understand the systems that make that worse. And I understand the difference between someone who wants to help and someone who wants to be seen helping." "I know," he said. "So I'll do it," she said, "on the terms I described, and we start the audit next week." He nodded once. There was no triumph in it, no performance, just acknowledgement. Outside, the ordinary city moved in its ordinary morning. The dog walker had rounded the corner and disappeared. The kids on the bicycle had sorted out whatever the complicated thing was. The man with the storefront was now flipping his sign from closed to open. "The name," Elena said. "Oren Vass. I want to know what's left. Records, photographs, anything that survived the erasure." "Rourke has already started that," Damien said. "I know. I want to start it myself, separately, and compare." She looked at him. "Because I've learned something this week about what it means when someone else controls which records survive." He held her eyes. The lesson in it, his lesson, the one she was returning to him, sat between them, and neither of them flinched from it. "Fair," he said. They finished their coffee. The waitress came back and refilled without being asked, the small, unsolicited grace of a place that had been doing this long enough to read a table. And Elena sat with the refilled mug and thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes, or tried to. Her mind kept doing its work. The exit count, the room assessment, the ongoing low-level inventory of a space and its variables. She let it run. She was done trying to explain it away. She put a hand on the table, the scarred one, looked at the palm, the raised edge of the old injury she now knew in its full context. This mark that had connected her to a night she'd lost and a man she'd saved and a life that had gone on without her knowing what it had been. Damien looked at her hand. She let him. "Dr. Ansel wants to meet with you," he said, "when you're ready. She says there are things she remembers about the girl from the hospital that she never put in any file." "I'll contact her," Elena said. "This week." She closed her hand. Flat on the table, the scar against the formica, the morning light coming in sideways and making nothing look like anything more than what it was. She thought about the emerald gown, about the moment she'd sat in that chair and the room had laughed at her, and she'd been 3 seconds from standing up and walking back to the kitchen. About the fraction of something, pride or stubbornness or the old instinct she'd never been able to name, that had kept her seated until the room went quiet and a man stood up from the chair no one was allowed to occupy. She thought, "You held still." And everything came. She thought, "That's something too." The coffee shop was warm and real and smelled like things being made. Outside, a city going about its ordinary life, full of people who had their own incomplete histories, their own gaps where something had been taken or lost or deliberately erased. She picked up her mug. She drank. She was, for the first time in 15 years, entirely present in her own life, with full knowledge of its cost and its shape, ragged at the edges and revised by violence and built on a loss she hadn't finished grieving and pointed toward a future she hadn't entirely designed. No clean lines, no resolution that didn't carry the weight of what it had taken to reach it, but hers. Irrevocably, completely, finally hers. She set the mug down, looked at Damien across the table. He was looking back at her with the concrete gray eyes she'd been reading since the ballroom, the ones she was starting to understand held considerably more than they advertised. "So," she said. "So," he said. Outside, the morning continued without them, and they let it, and sat in the ordinary light of an ordinary coffee shop in a city full of stories, and let the silence be what it was. Not a gap, not a wound, not an erasure. Just two people, and coffee, and the long ordinary work of what comes next.